this first one.
Alright, welcome everybody to our presentation. So obviously, like you've seen from the past presentations, our boundaries were rural Afghanistan, and just all the intricacies that go into that world. But so some tangibles that we came up with were the obvious poverty that we saw in the videos. I mean, malnutrition in children. People can't afford to put food on the table, basically, and there's not enough jobs. And the barren land. I mean, it's not good for agriculture. Poor infrastructure. You got sewage, no sewage systems, no water sources that are good, and obviously the Taliban. So we got poverty, homeless, hunger, malnutrition, flies. Going over it again. Natural elements, clothing, barren land, landmines within the land. Soil depletion, climate, poor infrastructure, again Taliban, and so their presence, the targeting of the Taliban, which can lead to collateral damage.
And then besides like GDP and number of casualties and disease and like sanitation and just things that you can actually quantify, there are a bunch of other things that really affect the situation in Afghanistan that are a lot harder to measure. Like people come up with algorithms or whatever to try and like measure things like distrust, fear, but they really play a huge role. Like you're living in a country with a 30% literacy rate, where there are people who are like basically living the same way they've been living for centuries, and then you have outside forces come in, like the United States, that will promise you things and that they can't always deliver on, and they'll try and give you security, and then they just leave. And then outside groups such as the Taliban will come in and use people as human shields and things like that, and that can just breed distrust. There's a real give and take with that. See, an intangible, you can't really measure the level of Taliban sentiment that really exists, and they're like a really like fluctuating group. Like it's really hard to nail down numbers because they're not an official military organization, they're just extremists. And then motivation and hope is another really difficult thing to quantify, because the Afghan people, right now their standard of living is incredibly low. Their economy is almost entirely dependent on opium, which produces heroin, which is an illegal drug, so they have to make their living basically illegally, and they're just basically either subservient to the Taliban, who can provide them some security, or they rely on foreign forces like the U.S. and who can't always deliver. So, yeah, and then hope can also be provided by the Taliban, because there are like young men who will join the Taliban for the same reason that U.S. soldiers join, for a steady paycheck, for like sense of adventure, for some hope for a better life rather than living off $2-3 a day. Being able to actually be part of something and have some sort of future rather than just live in one of these squatter communities and die of dysentery.
Next we have
for gains or losses, one of the main things we have is in the top you can read is people, aid, security, and trust. For people, it's for gains, immigration. More people are coming back to the country now. The other one's immigration. For aid, U.S., UN. Obviously, they provide a lot of civil work. They help with roads. They help with medical aid. And the losses of misuse of, which I don't really understand.
the misuse of the aid. It doesn't always necessarily go to the right people or the right places. The aid's there, it's just not always used in the right manner.
For security, obviously U.S. forces are in the area. Their loss is Afghan government. False promises, like for new PLs, they'll promise things that they can't always deliver on, and that can always go downhill from there, because then they won't trust us as much. And that goes into the next one, trust. For building infrastructure, we do a lot of building there, give them more water, try and improve their environment. But collateral damage, missile strikes, something else, false artillery, civilian deaths is a big collateral of that. For balance, fewer Taliban, immigration, more security and aid. Pretty much the less Taliban that's in the area, the more that hopefully that we can give them more aid. We don't have to worry about things getting stolen or anything going awry. Relationships with people and Taliban, external forces, internal forces. That's going to be yours.
I can talk about this a little bit. With the people, their relationship is a lot with the needs that they have. People themselves have a relationship with their needs that goes back and forth depending on what they need exactly, and that can also relate to the immigration. And there's also relationships between people, the Taliban, external forces, and internal forces, and each of those has certain traits that they themselves have relationships with. The Taliban has a relationship with the security that they can provide to the people, and they also can be a threat to the people just with their doctrine. And when the Taliban are there, generally it brings in other both the external U.S. or UN forces or the Afghan forces, which can cause more damage to the people if the Taliban are there. But with the external forces, the U.S. and UN will come in. They'll try to get rid of the relationship that the people have with the Taliban, which can either decrease security for the people, or once the U.S. forces are established, can increase their level of security. And then there's the internal forces, the ANA, National Police, which is their own organization. So theoretically, that should provide the best security to the people, since it's by the people for them. And then over here I have kind of a diagram outlining some of the relationships between the certain people. So up here we have the people of Afghanistan, the Taliban, the internal forces, and then external forces. And just the different lines mean different things. I'd like to start with the black, which are infrastructure, and a big part of this infrastructure flows from the external forces to the people. So the UN giving aid to citizens in some rural community, or the UN giving, or U.S. forces helping train and giving aid to the international forces, the ANA and the National Police. And then the ANA and National Police can in turn also, with the government, try to establish more infrastructure, help out their own people, but that's not always the best. They don't have as many resources as the U.S. or UN does, so their infrastructure that they give, though it's kind of, I consider it in a better way since it's from their own government, it's not always the best infrastructure or aid that they're building there. And then we also have the way that threats are interconnected, and external forces are a threat to both the Taliban and to the people, because when the external forces are with the people, it makes the Taliban resent the people more, and then the Taliban and external forces are threats to each other, as well as internal forces and the Taliban. And then the Taliban are also a threat to the people. And there's also a big part of it is the effect that the external and internal forces have on people as far as how the Taliban view them. When the people support these external and internal forces, the Taliban see that as a threat to them, which it is, and in turn are a threat to the people. And then there's also the security that extends from each group towards the people. Anyone can provide it. It's just in different manners, you could say. They have different motivations for providing that security. And what's really interesting, I think, about this kind of square of relationships is there's a lot of relationships coming out of the external forces, the U.S. and UN, and then not a lot really coming from the internal forces or the Taliban. And as we saw in the other ones, if you eliminate one part of the relationships, it's going to transfer the weight that they put in onto the other ones. And it would be interesting, are the internal forces going to be able to keep up with the needed infrastructure that the people need, or would that transition to the Taliban being able to provide more infrastructure, or who can provide better security, the Taliban or the internal forces? Since there's not a lot coming out of there right now, since there's more coming out of the external forces, that's just a really interesting dynamic. I didn't really intentionally draw it like that, but that's the way it turned out. So.
Yeah, the problem for the Afghan people is that it's a real catch-22. It's damned if you do, damned if you don't. Because if you help out the Taliban, you're basically harboring like terrorists or fugitives, and then you can be targeted by coalition forces, or Taliban have used families as human shields when they're hiding in houses. So like coalition forces don't drop JDAMs on them. And then if you side with coalition forces, yeah, NGOs will come and help you, Doctors Without Borders, you know, that's good. But I mean, what do they know is what's going to happen past 2014? They have no idea what the security situation is going to be like. I mean, just last week the Taliban hanged an 8-year-old boy for his family collaborating with coalition forces. So it's a really difficult situation for these people. There's really no clear solution for them.
And just basing off that, you could get tons of possibilities and probabilities. Just the fact that after understanding the status of Afghanistan and the relationship between the U.S. and UN with Afghanistan is very feeble. So there's a lot of different possibilities, especially the negative factor that could definitely, you know, send Afghanistan reeling. So for example, some of it could be, you know, U.S. driven out, either by Taliban or just because, like in Vietnam, you know, we just need to pull out. That's definitely a possibility. Taliban could be eradicated, but that's probably not going to happen just because they're part of the population. They are the population. So, and then there's allies no longer support U.S. I mean, we still have a couple of allies there, but I don't think there will be a time where we are solely the only ones in Afghanistan. Pakistan joined the fight against the U.S. Pakistan right now is it's not like an ally, but they're not really joining with Afghanistan. They're kind of staying away, so U.S. could deal with it. But if they happen to join, that's going to cause huge problems. We could always go into nuclear weapons and such, but as far as probable goes, U.S. will probably eventually leave Afghanistan, and the fact is, all of us probably will have a tour in Afghanistan sometime, so this will definitely affect us as far as how we're going to deal with these situations, these intangible and tangible effects inside.
Questions?
I just like to make a comment just on what you guys did. I felt that you guys probably did the best of like integrating the Taliban as knowing that it's part of the community. I feel like my group and the other group are kind of like, from our perspective as like soldiers, they're the enemy and they're like separate and apart. But to really understand the community, we have to understand them as just another group within the Afghan society, that they're not necessarily the evil boogeyman to every single Afghan. Some of them support them, some of them the people we're trying to win over and work with every day. So I thought that was really good how you integrated that into your presentation.
Thanks. I like your presentation.
Let's all hold hands and say.
Kumbaya.
10 minutes.
Hey, we're not the Navy, come on.
Questions, comments? So if you push that